The rain hammered against the synthetic canvas like bullets, and Jessica pulled her wings tighter around the shivering hatchlings. The tent leaked, it always leaked, and the youngest, barely 3 cycles old, whimpered against her scaled chest. Her iridescent purple hide, once a mark of pride among her people, now served only as a shield against the cold winds of Outpost 7. The colony world of New Terrace had promised opportunity for all species. The Galactic Council's propaganda had painted pictures of cooperation, prosperity, and peace. What they hadn't mentioned was that dragons, real ancestral dragons from Dracor Prime, were considered too volatile for standard housing. Too dangerous. Too other. So Jessica had taken the tent at the colony's edge between the industrial sector and the waste processing. She had 3 mouths to feed and no mate to help her. The factory work paid enough for protein bars and water rations, but never enough for proper shelter. Dragons could endure, she told herself each night. They had survived worse. She hadn't counted on Jack Martinez. The human mechanic had first noticed her during the shift change, her wings folded tight to fit through the narrow factory doors, her tail wrapped around her waist like a belt. Most species gave her a wide berth. Dragons had a reputation, after all. Centuries of galactic history painted them as warriors, conquerors, fire-breathers who'd once tried to dominate the outer sectors. But Jack had simply nodded at her. "Rough day?" he'd asked, his voice carrying that peculiar human warmth that Jessica had learned to distrust. Warmth usually meant pity, and pity meant weakness. "It is adequate," she'd replied, her English stiff and formal. That should have been the end of it. In any reasonable universe, the human would have moved on, returned to his own kind, and forgotten the dragon woman with scales like amethyst and eyes like molten gold. Instead, Jack had followed her, not obviously. Humans were subtle when they wanted to be. But over the next week, Jessica noticed him taking the same route after shift end, his tool bag slung over one shoulder, his weathered hands often carrying extra food packets that he'd claim were extras from the commissary. "For the kids," he'd say, pressing them into her clawed hands before she could refuse. "Can't let them go hungry." Jessica's pride warred with necessity. The hatchlings were hungry. Her factory wages barely covered their nutritional requirements, and dragons needed more protein than most species. "Why?" she'd finally asked him one evening, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What do you want from me?" Jack had looked genuinely confused. "Want, lady, I don't want anything. He'd gestured helplessly. "You've got kids. Kids shouldn't be hungry." It was such a simple statement, such a human statement. Jessica had heard the stories about humans, of course, the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, barely 2 centuries into their space age. They were considered primitives by most of the galactic community. Emotional, irrational, dangerously empathetic. That empathy should have made her more cautious. Instead, she'd let him walk her home. The tent had humiliated her. Jack had stood in the entrance, rain dripping from his jacket, and his face had gone through a dozen expressions in as many seconds. Shock, anger, determination. "No," he'd said flatly. "Absolutely not." Jessica's spines had risen defensively. "I did not ask for your opinion, human. You're raising 3 kids in a tent." Jack's voice had cracked. "In the rain, next to the waste processors." "No." He'd held up a hand when she tried to speak. "I don't care what the housing authority said about dragons. I don't care about their regulations or their insurance concerns or their bullshit excuses. You'll sleep under a roof. I cannot afford—" "I didn't ask what you could afford." Jack had pulled out his comm device, his fingers flying over the screen. "I've got a place. Old warehouse conversion. 3 bedrooms. It's not fancy, but it's dry and it's warm and it's got actual walls." Jessica had stared at him. "Why would you offer this? You barely know me." Jack had met her eyes. Not many beings could meet a dragon's gaze without flinching. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because those kids deserve better. Because," he'd paused, choosing his words carefully, "because that's what we do. We're human. We take care of each other. All of us. I am not human. Didn't say you had to be." The move had happened that night. Jack had called in favors, rallied other human workers, and within hours Jessica's few possessions were being transported to the warehouse unit. The hatchlings had cried when they saw their new rooms, actual rooms with doors and windows and heating units. Jessica had stood in the center of the living space, her wings trembling, trying to understand the strange burning sensation behind her eyes. Humans called it crying. Dragons had a different word, one that meant gratitude too deep for language. "I cannot repay this," she'd whispered. Jack had shrugged, already heading toward the door. "Don't want repayment. Just take care of those kids. Let them grow up somewhere safe." But Jessica had caught his arm, her claws gentle against his jacket. "The galaxy says humans are weak. That your empathy makes you vulnerable." Jack had smiled, that infuriating, gentle human smile. "Maybe, but we're still here, aren't we? Still looking out for each other. Still building homes and raising families and making things better." He'd glanced at the hatchlings, now exploring their new space with wonder. That's not weakness. That's strength. After he left, Jessica had stood at the window, watching the rain fall on the tent city below. Other beings still lived there, species deemed too dangerous, too alien, too other for proper accommodation. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find Jack again. She would ask him about building codes and housing regulations, because if there was one thing dragons understood, it was fighting for what mattered. And if humans could redefine strength as compassion, then perhaps Jessica could learn to do the same. The galaxy had misunderstood both species. Dragons weren't just warriors. Humans weren't just empaths. Together they were something the Galactic Council hadn't anticipated, builders of a better future, one roof at a time.